When I refused to let my wife's stepmother name our son, she said, then he won't carry your name either. Weeks later, I discovered the birth certificate had been altered without my consent. My father-in-law said, it was for the best. Your family doesn't matter here. I tried to file a correction, but the clerk showed me a notarized letter with my signature that I never wrote. My name is Evan Blackwood. I'm 33 years old and I used to live in Billings, Montana, where I built a decent career as a landscape architect. But all that changed the day I met Julia Remsen. I had just relocated to Sonoma for a job, nothing fancy, just a solid design gig for a high-end estate management firm. I wasn't looking for anyone. I had just finished fixing up a house in Billings and barely finished unpacking when my new coworker dragged me to a wine-tasting benefit at a Remsen property. That's where I met Julia. She wasn't like the other people milling around in their designer vineyard attire. She poured wine with a steady hand and greeted guests like she actually saw them. No fake politeness, no glazed-over hospitality smile. She looked me in the eye when she said hello, and I swear, it knocked the wind out of me. A month later, we were inseparable. By the end of that year, we were married in a quiet ceremony at her family's coastal retreat. I thought I had won the lottery. Julia was everything I didn't know I needed: calm, loyal, grounded. But the Remsen family? They were something else entirely. Her father, Gerald, barely spoke during dinner. When he did, it was something clipped and precise, usually coded in judgment. My first dinner at the estate, he asked where I went to school. I told him I studied at Montana State. His response? A polite nod followed by, not many of our guests have heard of that. Then there was Diana, Julia's stepmother. Blonde, polished, and always smiling just a little too long. The kind of woman who'd compliment your shirt and then say, it's so brave to wear that color. She never missed an opportunity to correct me. If I said, route, she'd say, you mean root. If I cooked dinner, she'd push her plate around and ask Julia, don't you miss the food from Milan? I told myself it was just how old money behaved. Polished snobbery wrapped in manners. Still, I ignored it. Julia was worth it. Everything changed when Julia got pregnant. That's when the real Remsen playbook came out. Julia and I had talked about names months before. We both liked Caleb Thomas. Caleb was my grandfather's name, and Thomas was a friend I lost in Afghanistan. It meant something to me. Julia loved it too. But the second we mentioned it, Diana turned to Gerald and said, that's not what we envisioned. I asked. Well, we've been discussing family names, Diana said, swirling her wine. Gregory was Julia's great-uncle. He founded the first inn. Jonathan was Gerald's father. Very meaningful. I looked at Julia. She was staring at her water glass, saying nothing. I should have pushed back harder, but I didn't want to turn it into a fight. Instead, I let it slide. I kept telling myself this was just noise, Diana and Gerald trying to assert control, but harmless in the grand scheme. Just part of marrying into an influential family. They could have their passive jabs and ridiculous innuendos. I was going to be a father. That's what mattered. What I didn't realize was that this wasn't just about names. This was the beginning of something far more sinister. A warning I ignored. The night Caleb was born started in chaos and ended in confusion. Julia had been feeling off all day, her breathing erratic and her stomach tight. Around midnight, I rushed her to the hospital. By the time we got there, everything moved fast. Too fast. Emergency C-section. I wasn't prepared for any of it. One moment I was holding her hand in triage, the next I was in scrubs, standing beside a surgical table, heart pounding like a war drum. And then he was here. Our son. Pink, tiny, screaming. Perfect. I couldn't stop crying. Julia was barely conscious, her eyelids fluttering under sedation, but when the nurse brought the baby close, she managed to smile. Just barely. It's him, I whispered. It's Caleb. I stayed by Julia's side, gripping her hand while they stitched her up. I kept looking over at the incubator where a nurse swaddled him. Caleb Thomas Blackwood. My son. That's what I believed then. It was sometime around 3 a.m. when the hospital administrator came in. Clipboard in hand, polite smile on his face. Just a few forms for the birth certificate, he said. Julia was asleep. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, distracted. I turned to the administrator, ready to go through everything. But before I could take the clipboard, Diana appeared like she'd been summoned. Oh, let me take care of that, she said smoothly. You should focus on your wife and the baby. I blinked. No, it's fine. I can do it. Nonsense, she cut in with that voice she used when pretending to be maternal. I've done this before. It's just details. I didn't fight her. I should have, but I didn't. I thought she meant decorating the nursery or picking up flowers or arranging something at home. Not legal paperwork. That was my mistake. 3 weeks later, I walked into the county office to get a copy of the birth certificate. I needed it to add Caleb to my insurance. I had my driver's license, my social security number, hospital documents, all ready. The clerk was nice. Efficient. She clicked her keyboard for a while, then frowned. I'm sorry, she said. I don't see any record of a Caleb Thomas Blackwood. I laughed. Must be a system error. Try just Caleb Blackwood. She tried again, then shook her head. What about just the last name? Blackwood. Nothing under that name, she said slowly, like she didn't want to upset me. Let me try the mother's name. Julia Remsen, I said. She typed, scrolled, then paused. There's a file here. Born on that date, at that hospital. Male. Mother listed as Julia Remsen. Name of child, Gregory Jonathan Remsen. She turned the screen slightly so I could see. No listed father. I stared at it, unblinking. Gregory. Jonathan. Remsen. Excuse me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That's not right. It's what's on the certified file. There must be a mistake. I was there. I'm the father. The clerk looked at me kindly. You'll probably need to file a correction petition. But I wasn't hearing her anymore. My hands were sweating. My knees felt weak. No listed father. Julia had been unconscious. And Diana, she had taken care of it. I left the office with nothing but a photocopy of a document that felt like a punch to the gut. My name erased. My son renamed. On the drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't even go to the house. I drove straight to the Vineyard Estate. When Diana opened the door, she was all pearls and fake smiles. I held up the paper. What is this? Her smile didn't change. Oh, Evan, come inside. No, you tell me right now. Why is my son named Gregory Jonathan Remsen? And why am I not on the birth certificate? She tilted her head, like I was being unreasonable. Well, she said, with that syrupy condescension she always used, we had to make sure the Remsen lineage was protected. I felt something break inside me. Protected? Like I was some threat. Some stranger. Not the man who married into their family. Not the man who stayed up all night holding Julia's hand. Not the father who had dreamed of naming his son after the two men who shaped his life. Not a father at all, at least not in their eyes. That night, I sat in my car for hours. The paper sat on the passenger seat, mocking me in bold black ink. Gregory. Jonathan. Remsen. And me? Nobody. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't face Julia until I had answers. Until I knew how deep this went. I ended up parked outside a diner for hours, the fluorescent, open all night sign flickering against the windshield. The photocopy of the birth certificate sat on the dash, folded and unfolded so many times the edges were worn soft. By morning, I drove straight home. Julia was sitting on the couch in her robe, a cup of tea cradled between her palms. Her face lit up when she saw me, then dimmed just as fast. Where were you? I held up the document like it was a weapon. Explain this. She took it with a confused frown, scanning the lines. Then her eyebrows knitted. Gregory? Why does it say that? You tell me. And why the hell am I not listed as the father? Julia looked at me like I was speaking another language. I didn't fill this out. I was under anesthesia. You know that. Diana said she'd take care of everything. I thought she meant balloons or some dumb banner. Not rewriting our son's identity. Julia's hands trembled. I didn't sign anything. Evan, I swear. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But her silence after the name suggestion, the way she didn't push back when Diana dismissed mine, it all came flooding back. Did you know about this before it happened? She shook her head, eyes wide. No, I never would have agreed to this. You know that. But I wasn't sure I did. Later that day, I drove back to the county records office and demanded to see everything. Every paper they had on file. The clerk, same woman as before, called over a supervisor. They led me to a small, windowless room. 10 minutes later, a file was placed in front of me. There it was. A notarized letter. It read, I, Evan Blackwood, consent to the child's name being changed to Gregory Jonathan Remsen and waive all parental rights in favor of the maternal family, given concerns about future economic security and heritage alignment. My jaw dropped. At the bottom, a clean, precise signature, Evan Blackwood. But it wasn't mine. Not really. It looked like mine, same slant, same little loop on the K. But it was too clean, too careful. A version of my signature I'd never use casually. It looked traced, deliberate. And the notary? Marlena Yu. A name I recognized from Julia's baby shower. She was Diana's friend, the one who brought the artisan diaper cake and talked about her foundation's gala between bites of canapes. The clerk tapped the page gently. It's all official. If there's an error or dispute, you'll need to file an affidavit and likely open a court case. I barely made it out of the building before I lost it. I sat in the car, trembling, furious, humiliated. They forged my name. They forged my name. I went home and told Julia everything. She sat on the bed, stunned, her hands covering her mouth. They can't do that. They can't. They did. And I think you knew more than you're saying. I didn't sign anything, she whispered. I didn't even see these papers. I swear to you. I stood by the door, unsure of whether I was more heartbroken or angry. You didn't sign anything, I said slowly. But you didn't stop it either. That shut her up. Later, after she fell asleep, I stood in the hallway outside the nursery. It still smelled faintly of fresh paint and cedar shavings. I stared at the name above the crib, Caleb Thomas, spelled out in wooden letters I carved by hand. I reached up and pulled them down one by one. Not because I stopped believing in that name, but because, for the first time, I realized someone was trying to erase me. And they were doing a damn good job. I called an attorney the next morning. Her name was Valerie Chun. Sharp, seasoned, no patience for bullshit. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I showed her the notarized letter, explained how Julia had been sedated during the procedure, and that I never signed a damn thing. She stared at the document for a long time before finally speaking. "This is a war move," she said. "Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. Someone wants you out of the picture, completely." I nodded. "I know who." She gave me a name for a forensic handwriting analyst, and I made the appointment that afternoon. I also requested the hospital's labor and delivery logs. Valerie needed proof that I was present for the birth and that Julia was under anesthesia when the paperwork was allegedly signed. I'd barely slept the night before, but adrenaline kept me going. I didn't even go home. I went to the guest house on the property and stayed there, away from the main house, from Julia, from everyone. I needed distance. A few days later, I got the logs. Just like I remembered, Julia was sedated, fully under, for the duration of the C-section. I signed in at 12:17 a.m., scrubbed in at 12:39, and held our son by 1:10. The timing of the notary's signature? 1:02 a.m. While I was holding my son, while Julia was unconscious. That night, while Julia slept upstairs, I found myself wandering the estate. I ended up outside Gerald's study, the one room I'd never been allowed into without permission. The door was cracked open. I hesitated and then walked in. I wasn't expecting to find anything. I just needed to feel like I was taking control back. But what I found was worse than I imagined. Stacks of papers littered the desk. Most were benign, Remsen and marketing materials, financial spreadsheets. But halfway down the stack, tucked into a navy folder marked personal, were a set of legal documents. Drafts for sole guardianship. The petitioner? Julia Remsen. The respondent? Evan Blackwood. The grounds? Emotional instability and economic incapacity. I froze. There were highlighted notes in Gerald's handwriting. Remove reference to prenatal presence. Weak argument. Shift emphasis to Julia's postpartum recovery. Evan's reactionary behavior. They were planning to take full legal custody. Strip me of my rights as a father. Frame me as unstable and incapable. Maybe even dangerous. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. By sunrise, Valerie had everything in her inbox. Within 24 hours, we filed a petition for emergency paternity restoration and submitted a formal motion to place a legal freeze on all custody-related filings by the Remsen family. We included the forged document, the hospital logs, and the evidence from Gerald's office. We didn't go straight for Diana or Gerald. Not yet. But we fired the first shot. The Remsens responded the way I expected, by retreating into silence. Julia didn't speak to me for 3 days. Not a word. She stayed upstairs with the baby while I remained in the guest house. The housekeeper shuffled between us like a messenger in a Cold War. Valerie said that was a good sign. Silence meant they were regrouping, plotting, but they weren't sure how much I knew. That uncertainty was leverage. I started carrying a small recorder with me. Every conversation, every meeting, every phone call. I even put up cameras around the guest house. I didn't trust anyone. Not anymore. This wasn't just about a name, or even custody. They were trying to erase me from my son's life. Legally, personally, financially, but they underestimated me. I wasn't going anywhere. The courtroom was packed tighter than a wine barrel in harvest season. Gerald and Diana sat on the left side, stiff and polished in their designer suits. Diana wore a silk scarf the color of dried blood. Gerald didn't look at me once. Julia sat in the middle, alone. No baby. Just a blank stare and her hands clenched in her lap. I was on the right, next to Valerie, who had a look on her face like she'd come to gut someone politely. It didn't take long for Marlena to buckle. Valerie went for her with quiet, surgical precision. She walked Marlena through the timeline, asked her to recall the exact moment she'd notarized the document with my forged signature. Marlena shifted in her seat. I was told Mr. Blackwood had already given verbal consent. By whom? Valerie asked. Diana Remsen. And when did you see Mr. Blackwood sign this? Marlena looked down. I didn't. The document was brought to me already filled out. Valerie nodded. So, to be clear, you never saw Evan Blackwood sign this document, yet you notarized it as if you did. Marlena's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His voice was calm but sharp. The name on the birth certificate will be corrected to Caleb Thomas Blackwood. Paternal rights are hereby restored in full. Any further attempts to alter legal guardianship will require court approval. I didn't move. I just sat there, letting the words sink in. Caleb Thomas Blackwood. My son. My name. It felt like taking the first real breath in months. Julia didn't look at me. Her face didn't change, but I saw her shoulders sink, just slightly. Like something in her had deflated. We exited the courtroom in silence. Valerie was already talking about next steps, financial audits, restraining clauses, possible charges. I nodded along, but my eyes were locked on the Remsons. Gerald walked ahead, face blank. But Diana turned as they passed, her eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched. You humiliated us, she hissed, just for the sake of pride. I stared at her, calm. No, I said, for the sake of truth. She blinked, like she didn't know what to do with that. They walked out without another word. Back at the house, the atmosphere had curdled. Julia stayed in her room with Caleb. I stayed in the guest house. No one spoke, and the housekeeper didn't hover anymore. That silence was louder than any fight. A few days later, Gerald stopped speaking to Julia entirely. I overheard him telling Diana, she'll come around. They always do. That same week, Diana moved her things into the carriage house temporarily. She claimed it was for peace, but I knew better. I changed the locks on the guest house after I found her inside, uninvited, standing near my laptop like she'd gotten lost on her way to the bathroom. I didn't trust anyone anymore. Not even Julia. She tried to play neutral. Said we needed to keep things civil. But every time I asked her where she stood on the name, the forgery, her parents, she just went quiet. Like she didn't know, or didn't want to admit it. That's when I realized. I might have won in court, but inside this house, I was still on enemy ground. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The first whisper came from the daycare application. I had filled out the forms, visited the facility, and even met with the director. Everything seemed on track until I got a call saying they were reassessing eligibility due to a concerning reference. What kind of reference? I asked. The woman on the phone hesitated. Someone called anonymously, said you were dealing with mental health instability. I hung up and sat in my truck, stunned. That phrase, mental health instability, wasn't random. It matched the phrasing in the fake guardianship petition Gerald had drafted. They were trying to frame me again. But this time, in public. It didn't stop there. The HR director at my firm called me into her office 2 days later. Evan, I just need to ask, off the record, she said. Have you been okay lately? Someone called in and left messages, implying you've been acting erratically. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I might chip a tooth. Let me guess. They didn't leave a name. No, she said gently. Just concerns. I started documenting everything. I bought a second phone, installed call recording software, took screenshots, downloaded voicemails, and backed everything up to encrypted cloud storage. Every blocked number, every distorted voice message, every text message that made me look like a paranoid father or a hostile ex-husband. Julia noticed I was colder, distant, but she didn't ask why. Maybe because she already knew. By then, she had fallen fully back under her parents' spell. She barely spoke to me unless it was about Caleb. And even then, she started using phrases like, we think, and the family decided. It wasn't her and me anymore. It was them and me. Then came the break I needed. One of Julia's cousins stopped by the estate. I barely remembered her. Ashley, maybe? She stayed for lunch and mentioned something odd as she left. Diana's always going on about how Marlena fixed Nana's paperwork last year. Said she took care of all those inheritance forms. I froze. Julia's grandmother had passed the previous fall. The estate had gone entirely to Diana and Gerald. But Julia had once told me her grandmother planned to split it 3 ways between her biological grandchildren. That night, I dug through my files. Julia's grandmother had signed over the vineyard parcel in late August, just weeks before her death. The notary listed? Marlena Yu. I handed it all to Valerie. Within 2 weeks, she filed a subpoena for Marlena's full notary logs. What came back made me sick. Marlena had notarized over a dozen documents tied to the Remsen family in the past 3 years, property transfers, medical directives, even amendments to wills. At least 4 had matching handwriting, all suspiciously clean and elegant, just like my forged signature. 2 of those altered documents stripped elderly relatives of their rights and shifted assets directly to Remsen Holdings, one of Gerald's shell corporations. This wasn't just about my son. It was a pattern. Forgery. Fraud. Elder exploitation. Valerie's voice crackled through the speaker when she called. They've done this before, Evan. More than once. They've made a business out of erasing people. I sat in the guest house, the walls closing in. They had done this before. They would do it again, unless someone stopped them. I looked over at the crib, where Caleb was sleeping peacefully under a nightlight. His chest rose and fell, tiny and unaware. That was the last night I ever let myself feel afraid. The next morning, I went to war. 2 weeks after Marlena's logs confirmed the forgery pattern, Gerald struck back. He filed for a temporary injunction, claiming I was attempting to unlawfully alter or liquidate shared property with Julia. It was nonsense, of course, but legally annoying. The Vineyard house, even the guest house I now lived in, was co-owned under a marital trust. He was trying to box me in, keep me from touching a thing. Valerie called it classic rich man legal harassment. I called it desperation. The same day I received notice of the injunction filing, I came home from a grocery run to find Diana in my kitchen, in the guest house, standing there like she belonged, a smug smile curling at her lips as she sipped coffee from my mug. I thought we agreed no more surprises, I said, dropping the bags harder than I needed to. Oh, Evan, she said, not even flinching. The door was open. It wasn't. She tilted her head, still smiling. Well, you know how keys get around. I called the sheriff's office on the spot. Diana played innocent the whole time, wide-eyed and wounded like I'd accused her of arson instead of trespassing. The deputy, who clearly recognized her, didn't press charges, just gave her a friendly reminder to stay out. The next day, I changed every lock on the guest house and had my lawyer file for a restraining order. Diana didn't take that lying down. 2 days later, she hit back with a new legal motion, petition for visitation rights as the child's maternal guardian figure. Her claim? Caleb was emotionally neglected by a hostile father with erratic behavior. It would have been laughable if not for the evidence she submitted, screenshots of text that I supposedly sent. One message read, I could take Caleb and disappear if I wanted. You people wouldn't see him again. Another, don't test me, Diana. You'll regret it. The texts were timestamped and signed, Evan B. And they were complete fiction. I never wrote them, never sent them. And yet, there they were, in court documents. Valerie studied them closely. They're edited. The formatting's wrong. The syntax isn't consistent with your speech patterns. And the metadata looks suspicious. She brought in a forensic digital analyst. 2 days later, we had our answer. The messages were fake, compiled from bits of real texts I had sent over the years, rearranged to sound threatening. The device used to send them? A spoofing app installed on a tablet linked to Gerald's winery office Wi-Fi. The analyst traced the IP. Valerie smiled when she saw it. They're clumsy. They're rushing now. Julia, when confronted, claimed she didn't know about the messages. But by then, I didn't ask her to choose sides. She already had. What I did instead was simple. I had the digital report printed. I mailed a copy to the court, to the DA's office, and, just for fun, to Diana's attorney. 3 days later, I received a reply. Not from Diana. From Marlena U. An anonymous manila envelope, no return address. Inside, a single note, written in tight, shaky penmanship. I made a mistake. I have something you need to see. Please keep this between us for now. She included a location, a time, and a second envelope. Heavier. Labeled simply. Gerald's notebook. The war had just turned. Not in their favor. I almost didn't go. Part of me thought it was a setup, one last twisted move by Diana or Gerald. But I couldn't ignore the envelope. I couldn't ignore the note. So I drove to the address Marlena gave me. It was a quiet park in Santa Rosa. Midday. Empty. I parked near a row of eucalyptus trees and waited. She arrived right on time, walking like someone already bracing for judgment. Hair pulled back, sunglasses on, and a thick envelope clutched against her chest like it might float away if she let go. She slid into the passenger seat and locked the door without speaking. I'm not recording this, I said quietly. She nodded, breathing through her nose. I didn't know it would go that far, she said. Not at first. It was just favors, small things. But Gerald, he made it feel like helping a friend. I didn't realize what I was part of until the elder estate stuff. Then the baby. Your baby. She handed me the envelope. I found this in Gerald's private office last week, she said. He left his planner behind at a charity board meeting. It was mixed in with his documents. I took it. I opened the envelope. Inside was a black leather notebook, embossed with the initials GR. I flipped it open. At first it looked like any corporate planner, dates, meetings, brief notes. Then I saw the entries that made my blood run cold. May 2nd, draft renouncement letter, Marlena 3 p.m. sign-off. June 14th, Julia sedation window confirmed, prep notarization chain. June 15th, transfer guardianship draft to D. For review, neutralize E. Post-birth. July 3rd, shell route, Rimson Holdings Rimson Wellness Foundation. Do not tell Julia until after paperwork finalized. Every entry laid it bare. The planning. The dates. The strategy. Gerald hadn't just allowed it, he orchestrated it. They hadn't just stolen a name. They had built an entire operation around removing me from Caleb's life, all while funneling family assets through shell charities and fraudulent notary work. The Rimson Wellness Foundation mentioned in the notes? Valerie found it registered as a nonprofit for mental health retreats. But it had no office, no staff, and listed a converted barn on one of the vineyard properties as its headquarters. That wasn't a wellness center. It was a tax shelter. Within a week, Valerie had the notebook scanned, cataloged, and delivered to the DA's office. We also subpoenaed the corporate records for both Rimson Holdings and the Wellness Foundation. What we found was stunning. Land donations supposedly gifted to the community had instead been quietly reclaimed through third-party sales, then rented back to Rimson affiliates. Tax-exempt on paper, profitable in practice. The fraud case was no longer hypothetical. It was documented, provable, tangible. The DA's office launched an investigation. Julia still hadn't spoken to me. Gerald and Diana must have felt the pressure, because their attorney sent over a vague settlement offer, non-admission of wrongdoing in exchange for family unity. They would acknowledge me as the father, allow Caleb's name to remain, and let go of the visitation filings. I didn't even blink before saying no. They had tried to erase me. Now it was their turn to disappear from the story. Valerie began prepping for the next court date. Not just family court. This time, we were moving into criminal territory. She listed out the charges: fraud, forgery, attempted custodial interference, elder exploitation, and misuse of charitable assets. "You ready for this?" she asked one evening. I looked over at Caleb, asleep in my lap, peaceful and safe. "Yeah," I said, more than ever. The courtroom was different this time. Bigger, brighter. Cameras lined the back wall, and a handful of reporters murmured among themselves, pins already poised. This wasn't just about my son anymore. This was about money, fraud, legacy. The kind of story people devoured in headline form. Rimson Empire faces allegations of forgery and financial exploitation. Gerald sat ramrod straight at the defense table, his face carved from stone. Diana flanked him, jaw clenched, lips pursed into a pale pink line. Julia wasn't there. I sat next to Valerie, watching everything unfold like a man finally stepping out of a nightmare. Marlena took the stand first. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrinkled at the edges, voice trembling. But when she opened her mouth, she didn't hold back. She admitted to notarizing documents she hadn't witnessed. She described Diana dropping off already completed forms, always under pressure. Gerald said it was a formality, that the family didn't like lawyers involved, that it was cleaner if I handled it quietly. Then Valerie introduced the notebook. She laid it on the court's projector screen page by page, reading each damning line aloud. Neutralize E. Post-birth. Julia sedation window confirmed. Transfer property via Rimson Holdings shell. The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Then came the second blow. Valerie unveiled the fraudulent charity, Rimson Wellness Foundation. She showed the flow of donations from elderly relatives' estates to the nonprofit. Then from the nonprofit to a shell LLC. Then quietly back to Rimson Holdings. Tax-free. Completely fabricated. The judge's eyebrows arched higher with each document. When it was over, he didn't speak for several moments. Then, this court orders a full forensic audit of Rimson Holdings, Rimson Wellness Foundation, and associated trusts. All assets under these entities are frozen, effective immediately. Gerald didn't move. Diana did. She exploded from her seat, shrieking, "This is a setup. He's lying. This is our family." The bailiff reached her before she got halfway across the courtroom. She kicked and screamed, dragging her nails along the wooden rail as they pulled her out. "This is slander. He's nobody. He's nothing." The judge banged his gavel once, calm but firm. "Remove her from the courtroom. If she returns, she does so in cuffs." I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just watched her go, still shouting until the heavy door shut behind her. That night, Julia served me with separation papers. I wasn't surprised. We hadn't spoken in weeks. Not about anything that mattered. She didn't even look me in the eye when her lawyer handed me the documents. But I didn't fight it. Because by then, I had full custody of Caleb. Not shared. Not partial. Full. The court ruled in my favor after the forgery evidence surfaced and Marlena testified. Julia didn't contest it. Not seriously. She looked hollow by then, like someone who had been told too late that the fire she'd watched burn was also consuming her. The state announced a formal investigation into the Rimson estate fraud within days. Forensic accountants moved in. Gerald's properties were locked down. Employees were interviewed. Diana's name was already circulating in whispers and local press articles. One reporter even tried to interview me outside my office. "Mr. Blackwood, did you ever imagine this kind of outcome when you first filed the birth certificate correction?" I looked at him, then down at Caleb in his stroller. His little fingers wrapped around my thumb. "I just wanted my son to have his name," I said. "And now the Rimson Empire is falling apart." Any comment on that? I shrugged. Sometimes when you build a house on lies, it doesn't matter how big it is. One good storm, and it all comes down. I wheeled Caleb back toward the truck. Sunlight spilled across the pavement, warm and clean. The storm wasn't over, but the worst of it was behind us. The indictments came fast. Diana was arrested first, charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit custodial interference, and elder exploitation. The morning the news broke, her face was plastered across every local channel. That trademark smile gone, replaced by a mugshot that looked like someone realizing, for the first time, that actions had consequences. Gerald was next. His charges were even more sprawling: tax fraud, property manipulation, probate tampering, misuse of charitable funds. The DA called it one of the most sophisticated but shameless family-run fraud operations in recent county history. His attorney tried to negotiate a settlement, but the judge had already seen the notebook. There was no room left for deals. The Remsen name, once spoken with reverence in wine country, became a punchline. Their luxury and brand? Seized by court order. Auctioned off to repay damages. Even their flagship property in Healdsburg was sold to an outside firm. A press release made it official. Remsen Retreats is under new management, effective immediately. Marlena received a suspended sentence. Her cooperation spared her prison, but not her reputation. She closed her notary business, resigned from every board she sat on, and left town quietly. I didn't hear from her again, and honestly, I didn't need to. Julia moved out of the main house the week after the final court ruling. She didn't fight the custody terms. She didn't even show up for the final hearing. Her lawyer emailed a brief message: Julia Remsen will not contest sole legal and physical custody of Caleb Thomas Blackwood. That was the first time our son's full, true name had appeared on an official court document without resistance. I had the papers framed. The restitution settlement from the civil suit gave me enough to buy a new home, modest, quiet, with a big backyard where Caleb could grow up chasing bugs and kicking a soccer ball. The title was in my name. Only mine. The family court also ordered Gerald and Diana to pay full compensation for emotional distress, legal fees, and damages related to forged identity documents. Every check arrived late, begrudgingly. But they cleared. That money didn't fix the betrayal, but it paid for a future I could build myself. I took time off work and spent my days with Caleb. Diaper changes, storybooks, long walks with the stroller. I taught him how to plant tomatoes. We got a dog, his idea, sort of. He pointed at one during a walk and squealed so loud I figured, why not? Her name's Ruby. She sleeps at the foot of his crib every night. A few months later, a local fathers group reached out. They'd heard my story, pieces of it, anyway. They wanted me to speak at a conference on parental rights and family court reform. I almost said no. Then I remembered the feeling of standing in that records office, being told my son didn't legally exist as mine, that I wasn't even listed, that I'd been erased. I went. I told my story. No embellishment. No drama. Just the truth. Afterward, a man approached me, tears in his eyes. Said he hadn't seen his daughter in 2 years because his ex's family pulled something similar. He hugged me and said, "You gave me hope." That made all of it. The court dates, the sleepless nights, the months of walking through fire, worth it. I still live in Sonoma. Still work in landscape architecture. Still get the occasional look from someone who remembers the Remsen collapse. But I don't flinch anymore. My son's name is Caleb Thomas Blackwood. He carries his grandfather's grit and the legacy of a fallen friend. And me? I carry the knowledge that sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about what you gain. It's about what you refuse to let be taken.